Hi, I'm Brittney Gallagher, trapped in a Game Boy.
Hey, and I'm Phil Libin, and welcome to the second episode of Degrees of Freedom, making the out of office world.
Last time we introduced our definition of distributed work, and during that conversation, we hinted at what was the catalyst for this. And of course, it was the COVID-19 pandemic, which brought many of us out of the office to working from home. In fact, there was a 12-fold jump in work from home at the start of the pandemic. And as you can see, it's tapering off, but only slightly. And in this episode, we'll explore this more deeply. Who's this guy?
I had a chance to interview Roelof Botha, who was just promoted right after we taped this, in fact. So good things happen to people who come on our show, apparently. Roelof is now the senior steward at Sequoia, which basically means he is in charge of the partnership of investments. I think that's awesome, and I think also senior steward is a really epic title. Roelof is great. Roelof is my favorite venture capitalist, the one I've worked with the longest. He was our primary investor at Sequoia back when I was running Evernote, and we've been working with him for 15 years. And he is kind of one of the smartest people I know on the subject of startups and innovation, and especially what to do when times are good and what to do when times are bad. And lucky enough to have a really cool conversation with him.
Yeah, and you talk with him about Crucible Moments, and we'll define a little bit about what that is a bit later. But it's a very interesting and fun conversation. I really enjoyed it. And we also have
And Tammy Sun, who is the founder and CEO of Carrot Fertility, also a fully distributed company that basically Tammy and I were both running companies right at the beginning of the pandemic, and decided to go fully distributed pretty early on. And so it's been a couple of years. We both moved to Bentonville, Arkansas, and she is a much more impressive and accomplished CEO than I am, and has all sorts of wisdom about growing and scaling a team fully distributed, using the out of office principles, and also what it takes for bigger companies to keep their employees happy.
and later I'll be interviewing Akee Kazi, who had his own personal crucible moment and sort of reinvented himself thanks to the pandemic. So all that and more. But first, Phil and I talked together when we were in Bentonville about the beloved office. And
The old Evernote office. This here, which is not a pattern that the White Walkers make out of corpses. This was before the Game of
before
Thrones shot.
before Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones was shot. And this is my first exposure to a thing called air plants, which I didn't know about. Apparently, they're just plants, and you stick them in the air, and you occasionally mist them with water or something, and they stay alive and beautiful. Yeah, we spent a lot of time and money on this office, and it was nice. It was beautiful. It was, in hindsight, a really dumb thing to do.
But more about that in just a minute. You feel very differently about the office now than you did before, right? At Evernote, there's some funny stories about how you bought a bus to commute people from San Francisco to Redwood City. So people are commuting on a bus for 2 hours a day. Then they're at an office for many hours because, as the office is this central place where everyone can get together and share ideas. Board members didn't show up at a board meeting unless they were physically in the same room. You couldn't remote in. And now you've just had this complete change. And this is just, I don't want to say an example of something you were wrong about, but, it's,
No, I was totally wrong. Yeah.
how did this change happen for you? Like, was it the technology got good enough? Was it like just the pandemic really is what exploded this out for you? Like, because it's a lot to change your mind about.
It's a lot. And I don't think it would have changed my mind without the pandemic, without COVID. I think it was forced to. Mm-hmm. So I think, at Evernote, so we did, I was very proud of this. It's like, we're going to have a good culture. We made this really nice office. We spent a lot of money
And
in Redwood
sushi
City.
chef. I mean, I would have stayed.
We had a sushi chef. I miss the sushi chef a lot. We had a great office. So we spent a lot of money building this great office. And then, we had to spend a lot of money like busing people into the office for, like 90 minutes a day each way, average commute from the city. And this is the thing that I was proudest of. We actually got everyone expensive headphones so that they could wear their big expensive headphones
At the office
at the
where
office
they're supposed to collaborate.
to isolate themselves from all the other people that we had also paid a lot of money to bus into the office. And somehow, like, I didn't realize that was just asinine. Like, that was just so stupid. And most of us didn't realize. We were all kind of into it. I don't think everyone was.
I mean, yeah, you were certainly not alone. I mean, I went to the Googleplex once and I was like, I don't need to ever go home. Like, you've got my gym, you've got better equipment than I could ever have, and this coffee is delicious. Why would I leave?
My brother worked at Google when I got to Silicon Valley. I think I ate every meal there.
Yeah, the meals were delicious. I was like, I can never cook this good.
You got everything you wanted.
Yeah.
And that was
terrible. Except your family and your friends. Like, that's the one thing that...
Well, mostly your friends.
I guess, yeah.
And that was kind of demented. Like, it was kind of demented that the company would provide everything for you, would have to cater to all of your professional, financial, spiritual needs. Like, literally, like, you did your laundry there, you ate food there, all of your friends were there, you dated people there. If you wanted to organize politically, you did it there.
Super PAC was formed at Google.
Yeah, and on the one hand, like, that was, I guess that maybe that seems kind of like luxurious, like a big perk. But on the other hand, like, the flip side of that is the company owns you. The company gets all of your time. You're spending all of your time there. You can't do anything else. It's weird.
Was that part of your thinking, though? Like, as you're planning this out, you're like, well, I can just keep my employees here. Like, I know it sounds malicious, but, did you just assume people were more productive? Like,
yes, I think we assumed that people were more productive. And, we wanted to have an office that had a healthy culture, good communication flow, blah, blah, blah.
It almost seems kind of like a predatory culture.
It does, yeah. And I know, like, we didn't think of it as that at the time. And
right.
I know a lot of the people at Google and at Facebook who were making their offices, I know they didn't think of it that way either. But that's the effect. Like, who cares what you intended to do?
Right, sure.
What matters is, like, what you actually made. And what we put out into the world are these monolithic office cultures that turn out not to be that great. And by the way, what we put out into the world as a result of those offices, what was created in those offices was a lot of tech products and industry that also turned out, in hindsight, not to be that great. So yeah, I think there's a lot, to question there. But I very much thought this was the way to do it. And you're right. I banned remote participation in, like, important meetings, like board meetings. I would tell board members, like, you can't dial in. You show up in person, you don't show up, because I didn't want to have a weird, hybrid
like, where
experience.
they're on the screen and where do we look? And
and I don't think, and I did a lot of stuff in person. I was very much an in-person guy. Like, we would make a lot of important decisions at the company by, like, going for a coffee walk. I would, like, walk by someone's desk and I'd be like, hey, let's go grab a cup of coffee. And we would walk for coffee. And we would talk and we would make some decisions. I think we were, if it wasn't for the pandemic and none of that worked anymore, we were forced to sit at home and we couldn't do it this way. And that's when it had to change. And I think the only difference between the way that we thought about it at our company and the way a lot of other people did is we somehow, within a few weeks of the pandemic, we kind of realized we aren't going back. So we may as well make this really good. Like, yeah, that was before, this is now, let's make this really good.
That was Phil on getting rid of what once was the beloved office and how he's working to make the out-of-office world that much better. Up next, Phil interviews Roelof Botha, Sequoia Capital's now new senior steward, about Crucible Moments. I'll let them describe what that is.
One of the things that I have heard you talk about quite a bit is this concept of Crucible Moments for companies. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about not just companies, but maybe this period of history that we're living through in the world. Can you explain what you mean by Crucible Moments?
Sure. Whenever I think about a company's business, its execution and its strategy, there are clearly a large number of important decisions that get made every day, but not all of them are truly pivotal to the eventual outcome of a business. And we think of Crucible Moments as being one or two probably defining moments that happen in any given year that a company needs to identify that they're Crucible Moments, and then needs to rally the right resources to make sure that they make a good decision. And an example of that might be, Netflix's decision to go from being a DVD business to being a streaming business. It's a crucible decision they got right, and they executed well on it. And there's a crucible decision that Blockbuster had, which is, do they abandon physical retail and embrace either DVD rental or streaming? And they got it wrong. And one of those two businesses is still around and the other is not.
But the main reason I want to talk about Crucible Moments is I think this concept that you've identified really well for companies, I think maybe also applies to the larger system of just the world in general, or the environment that we find ourselves in. It feels like right now we are living through this crucible moment for society. I've talked about this being the changiest that the world has ever been, in my lifetime. I think triggered by the pandemic, but because of so many other things, fundamental pillars that had been set in stone, that had seemed to be really resistant to change for decades, all of a sudden are like up for grabs. And so it's like the world is going through this crucible moment, and it's up to startups to control, to engage with a very large portion of that. A lot of the positive change, not all of it, but a lot of it is going to come from startups. So like, how are you seeing this moment, 2022 as a crucible moment for the world?
So I agree with you in terms of labeling it as a crucible moment. It's absolutely true. We face so many important decisions about how to react to this new world that surrounds us. And what's interesting is the number of new company formations in America increased dramatically after the first couple of months of the pandemic. So you're absolutely right. Part of what happens is, it gives people a reason to pause and to reconsider. You're seeing it in labor markets right now, where people don't want to do maybe the job they used to do because they realize how unfulfilling it was, and then they want to do something different. They want to move to a different city. You're seeing lots of mobility within the United States as well. So it gives people a reason to pause and to reconsider. And because the world is so different, it gives companies an opportunity to serve the needs of a world that is now different. I mean, it's part of what we're doing with obviously. In this new world, people are embracing working everywhere, anywhere, in a way that's completely different from what it used to be as a fringe phenomenon. There was one person in the office maybe who had to move and they worked remotely, but it was an exception. And now it becomes the norm, and people are embracing it. And then the question is, I always think about this, every solution creates its next wave of problems. So the solution for some people is to move, or to go to a different city where they want to work, or find a different job that really makes them passionate. But this now creates other problems. How do you cope effectively with a world like this? How do you cope effectively with all your employees not being in the same physical building every day? How do you run an all hands meeting? All these sort of things now change, but in turn create opportunities.
Yeah, and I think things that used to be, I think, very resistant to change, how we think about education, how we deliver healthcare, how we think about, commuting. These are all things that there've always been startups kind of around this, but these are the the very the almost Sisyphean tasks where you expect startups to bang their head against these things that are just very resistant to change. But now they're all up in the air, right? Because this new world that we're describing is going to have a different educational system, and is going to have a different healthcare system, and is going to have a different system of commuting and real estate and performance reviews and hiring and all of those things. So this feels like the time, if there was ever a time for startups to challenge these fundamental ideas, now is the time to do it.
Absolutely.
So
it's interesting. So just one thing, often we listen to a company and the idea sounds fantastic. This is a very sensible idea. It seems like the world should work like this. And then we ask the question, but why now? If the world should have been like this, why isn't it yet like this? And often, there are good reasons, and sometimes it's just behavior change, or things. There's a great book I read once, which is called The Hinge Factor: How Chance and Stupidity Have Changed the Course of History. Right? Sometimes it's not a good reason, but we ended up in a bad spot. What's happened now, the pandemic has forced us to reconsider these things, and we can actually make change for the better, and that's really exciting.
That was Phil Libin and Roelof Botha of Sequoia Capital talking about Crucible Moments. Up next, Phil is joined in person with Tammy Sun, the CEO of Carrot Fertility, to talk about their very own Crucible moment.
So maybe talk a little bit about where the company was at the beginning of the pandemic, and how much fun that was, and how you dealt with it, how you got through it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that anyone who works in benefits or healthcare at the beginning of the pandemic that tells you that they weren't terrified is definitely lying. Definitely lying. We sell a product to employers And I think we were at one point staring down the barrel of 30% sustained unemployment at the time.
Just
March, April.
and just to remind people about that, right? This was like, in that March, April,
Yeah,
2020,
March, April 2020.
everyone was saying that like
Great Depression,
Right.
sustained economic recession, 30% unemployment would be sort of the new reality.
people will be lucky to still have jobs. Companies are going to stop spending money on any kind of perks or benefits
Right.
because, why would they?
Right.
I mean, B2B spending in general is probably forecast to fall off a cliff, but specifically benefits, that you have to be like at really the bullseye
Mhm.
for industries that were theoretically about to get really badly screwed.
Right. And so, we were not sure what the impact of the pandemic would be on our business. But interestingly, one thing has stayed extremely resilient throughout the pandemic, which has not changed a single iota over the past 18 months, which is in this country, in America, whether you agree or not, employers deliver healthcare. They are the delivery mechanism for healthcare, and that became even more true in the pandemic than today than it was before. And so for us, it did not change the need for this type of healthcare from our customer base, which is employers and now health plans, and in fact accelerated it. So the fundamental pipes and the fundamental dynamics of the employer-employee relationship were not disrupted as part of the pandemic, and in fact deeply solidified. And that relationship brought to the forefront a new and emerging need on behalf of employees, which is fertility treatments and healthcare. It actually accelerated the demand for that. We saw on our platform that today serves nearly 1 million people and over 300 customers. For example, the demand for egg freezing reached pre-pandemic levels probably 2 or 3 months into 2020. So like around September, October, the recovery started to happen.
Well, which was, I'm going to give my next question, is like when did you know that actually it wasn't going to be as much of a disaster as I guess the initial market was telling you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw the earliest signals from our existing customers.
Yeah.
We saw really high retention and a really high commitment to the product and to their employees. And so if there was ever going to be sort of an early signal that future growth or the market had fundamentally changed, it would have come to us from our existing customer base. And instead, our existing customer base were asking us for more ways that they could support their employees. What else can you offer us? What other products can you deliver next year?
We actually had Roelof on a couple of weeks ago from Sequoia to talk about that. And his framework is, he talks about these crucible moments for companies, moments where a company makes a decision that fundamentally alters its trajectory. And these are the things that, looking back, really going to define the company. Do you think you went through a crucible moment around the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple of crucible moments, both in the business model and then in the business vis-a-vis like the team. So at a business level, it definitely accelerated and changed our product roadmap. And, as I'm sure the pandemic did for nearly every business in the world, but specifically, we were forced to refine the way that we build our product and refine the way that we deliver it in a way to make sure that we could always go back to our customers and show how we paid for ourselves and deliver dollars back in savings. And so at the core of Carrot is a deeply clinical solution that drives cost savings to essentially the major payers of healthcare in this country, which are employers. And we can talk a little bit about that if you want. The other crucible moment was really like in an instant. I never knew that, like, when I walked out of my San Francisco, hugely expensive San Francisco office for the last time, that would literally be the last time I ever saw that office. And so the team became immediately distributed, permanently so. And I think, there were a number of really important moments there where it was important to, to communicate, to learn how to reconnect each other in a way that wasn't dependent on face-to-face communication. I think that we have done that transition exceedingly well, and we are now a fully distributed company, permanently so. I think we've hired in 40 different states, and we're operational this year. We'll be in 80 countries around the world and available in 120. So
let's just focus in on that side as well. So we talked about how the crucible moment of the pandemic, how it changed the product mix, the company, but also it changed the way you run the company. So let's talk just a little bit about how big were you? How many employees did Carrot have at the beginning of the pandemic? Because you've been around for a few years before that.
Yeah. I mean, we've experienced a lot of growth. A lot of our growth has happened over the past, 18 months. I think at the time of the pandemic, we were just about 120. Today, we're, I think, coming up on 300.
And so you've hired, 180 or so people without having met most of them in person before.
Oh yeah, I don't think I've met most of my C-suite, my C-suite managers who report to me. We've hired my top line C-suite managers and executives in Iowa, folks in Texas, in North Carolina. My CHRO is from North Carolina, and I'm kind of embarrassed. It's embarrassing given how competent these people are and how great they are as leaders. I'm embarrassed that I never would have met them. I never would have hired them pre-pandemic. I would only have looked in, the pools of SF in New York that we were so habituated to look in.
That was Phil Libin and Tammy Sun of Carrot Fertility talking about their very own crucible moment and how they pivoted to become a fully distributed company during the pandemic. In our final segment, I'm joined by Akee Kazi, a knowledge worker who's helping shape this out-of-office world. Akee had his own personal crucible moment during the pandemic and really reinvented himself. Akee and I are in for Web having a bit of a fireside chat. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Akee.
Yeah. So I'm originally from New Orleans, born and raised, grew up there my entire life, currently based in Atlanta, and I am a self-taught product designer.
So in this episode, we're talking about how the pandemic was a crucible moment for a lot of people and a lot of companies. Can you talk about, for you, what changes you made in your life and how working distributed has really affected you?
I was working as a bartender prior to the pandemic, and doing that part-time. And once the pandemic hit, a lot of restaurants and bars, including the one that I worked for, shut down. And so after that, I moved back in with my family and really started to use that time to sort of reflect and figure out what was next as this really uncertain time started to happen.
So then could you talk a little bit about your journey from not really being a designer at all to now actually being a designer?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you're talking about this crucible moment, this life-changing moment. The pandemic was, because I had not even considered getting into tech, getting into design, even prior to the pandemic. And so using that time to shelter in place was a time to learn. And so after having those conversations and networking with others, they sort of said product design, UX design is where I think you would do best. And so I started to reach out to people. I started watching YouTube videos, reading articles, and finding resources that were going to allow me to learn the fundamental principles and practices of design. At the same time, I started learning a little bit about the tools that were used, like Figma, and really just over the course of that year, looking for any opportunities. So working for free on people's websites, or a CEO or a founder that had an app idea, I would work with them to give them a brief MVP of their product. And so the pandemic for me was an opportunity to learn the foundations of what it means to work in tech, and then also the skills necessary to make this a full-time job, which I did. I was able to join a successful startup named Macro, which was then acquired by and join the organization. And so going from an unemployed bartender to now working for a tech company and working remotely full time, it's a huge shift, and it's one that I'm always reflecting on and extremely grateful for.
Well, thank you so much, Akee, for joining me on in our little fireside chat, and good luck.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
That was Akee Kazi on how the pandemic was a personal crucible moment for him and how he reinvented himself.
I'm looking forward to meeting Akee in person. He's actually one of the, I guess, a few dozen people now that that I've worked with, but I've never met in person yet. And it's kind of neat. It's kind of fun to meet someone in person for the first time after you already kind of know them because you've seen them on video, you've worked electronically with them before. I don't know. I think it's much better. I think I used to waste a lot of time in the before times meeting people in person that I'd never met before. Man, talk about awkward.
Yeah, what's the starter conversation there?
Exactly. I was never good at the small talk.
Phil, did you have a personal crucible moment that, for you that is maybe not necessarily related to the pandemic, but something that's kind of been a crucible moment for you?
Oh man, so many. It's been all crucibles.
My life is a series of crucible moments.
Series of crucible moments. So when I was running my second company, Core Street, our security company, and me and one of my co-founders, Dave, we spent a lot of time playing World of Warcraft. It had just come out. We spent, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, whenever it was, playing World of Warcraft. We got pretty serious about it. It was a pretty big time sink, and I really liked it. Even like 4 or 5 years later, I really liked it. And then then we started Evernote, and I had a meeting with Dave, and we said, all right, we can either play this game or we can play that game. We can either play Warcraft or we can play trying to run this company. And we decided that Evernote would be more fun. And so we had a little ritual. We forced each other to delete our World of Warcraft accounts because we knew that if we hadn't, there'd be way too much temptation to go past it. So yeah, I still remember the day I walked away from World of Warcraft.
From World of Warcraft. Did you raid? Were you in a guild? Like
I was in a guild. I actually authored anonymously. No one can ever trace it back to me. A quite popular World of Warcraft webcomic at the time.
Oh,
no one knows it. Yeah,
well known fact.
never find it. It's still there, but I mean, it hasn't been updated in whatever 15 years. But,
yeah, but wow,
no one will ever tie it back to me
until now.
How about you? The crucial moments for Brittney? I know, right?
Showing up. I think one of mine would be just showing up. I went to a book signing, or actually, I think the fairest one is how we met. I think that's still my favorite. I was at a South by Southwest, and I went to a talk that like was related to Steve Wolfram, and I was like, huh. And I heard there was a dinner, and I was like, oh. Well, I'd like to go to this dinner. And so I just went up to the lady and I was like, hi, can I come? I'm a journalist and I'm really interested in all the stuff you guys are talking about and I'd love to cover it. And she just looks at me and she goes, she's like, felt like she was like so taken aback by someone being just like so forward. She was just like, okay, sure. Yeah, we actually had someone drop out. You can come. And I go to this dinner, I end up sitting next to you. And then we end up talking about Star Trek and science fiction. And however many years later, 7, 8 years later, here we are.
I remember that dinner. I somehow got roped into doing a conversation dinner with Stephen Wolfram about. I think the topic was something like whether the AI was going to take over the world and kill all the humans or something. And
yeah.
I think Stephen was on the maybe we need to take it carefully side, and I was on the come on AI, what's taking so long? Bring it on. We've had a good run side. I think I may be oversimplifying the positions, but
yeah. So I would say that was definitely a crucible moment because here we are doing this. If I never talked my way into that dinner, we would not be here.
I'm glad you did.
Me too. In the next episode, we'll talk about where a lot of companies stand and the different types of models we're hearing about. Thanks to our distinguished guest this episode.
Yeah, thanks, Roelof, and thanks, Tammy.
Yeah, and thanks, Akee. It was a lot of fun. That's it for this episode of Degrees of Freedom, Making the Out-of-Office World. Until next time, I'm Brittney Gallagher.
And I'm Phil Libin.